Good day, South Africa. South African Revenue Service, or SARS Act, number 34 of 1997's Part 3, Section 15, which covers the disclosure of interest within SARS, shows how all those connected to our government are required by law to practice transparency on all matters taxation related. In that, quote, Section 15, a board member, not more than 8 persons who are unconnected with SARS and appointed by the Minister, the Commissioner, and not more than 2 senior employees of SARS designated by the Commissioner, who has a personal or financial interest in any matter in which the board gives advice, must disclose that interest and withdraw from the proceedings of the board when that matter is discussed, unquote. The DA is justified in its latest efforts to ratify the tax standings of Sekunjalo Investments owned independent newspapers in light of this company's historical involvement in the state capitalism ordeal, which has cost South Africa dearly in terms of economic growth. A notable transaction which links Sekunjalo Investments with Africa's largest asset manager in the Public Investment Corporation, or PIC, is the purchasing of Independent News and Media South Africa, or INMSA, which amounted to 2 billion rands, with 250 million rands of this coming from a loan from the PIC to Sekunjalo. During the commission inquiry into the PIC chaired by Commissioner Lex Mpati, Sekunjalo founder Iqbal Survey confirmed the figures.
And then on the independent media, we're looking at about 1.3 billion or so, because it was the subordinated loans, debentures and all that. Yeah, come again.
That is not correct. You specifically, through you, Mr. Commissioner,
Yes.
you're referring to the investment of the PIC in independent media. So the independent media, and I'm saying PIC as opposed to everyone else.
Yes.
In independent media, in 2013, the PIC had invested on day one of the transaction 1 billion, which was then paid to the Irish as part of the 2 billion acquisition price, just a little bit over 2 billion. The Sekunjalo Consortium, not to be confused with Sekunjalo Holdings, Sekunjalo Consortium is a consortium of a number of trade unions, black empowerment groupings and other groupings together, which own 55% of independent media, then paid the PIC immediately 150 million. So the PIC's exposure in 2013 was in fact 850 million, which is a combination, 25% of that was the equity contribution, and the remaining equity out of the total equity, and the remainder of that was debt. If I may just say one point, if you allow me, Mr. Commissioner, the PIC has invested 7 billion in TSO Black Star. That today is worth 200 million.
Yeah, let's stop there. Yeah. All right. So,
After admissions from former Finance Minister Nene during his testimony at the Zondo Commission on state capture, it was established that the above-mentioned transaction was what the state capture implicated Jay Gupta had desired to have his family be a part of, together with the Sekunjalo Investments founder Iqbal Survey. Minister Nene also confirmed to the State Capture Commission that he believed that his dismissal from the Finance Ministry in 2015 by former State President Jacob Zuma was as a result of the minister's repudiation of the nuclear program that benefited the Guptas. Another similar example to the Gupta appeasing behavior by the Zuma Ramaphosa administrations was the testimony of former parliamentary cabinet member Dr. Sidi Mufamadi at the Zondo Commission that, quote, 20 million rands was paid, unquote, by the State Security Agency, or the SSA, to the Sekunjalo Investments owned African News Agency, or the ANA. Survey's sinister tendency of being in the receiving end of state funding from state departments such as the SSA and the Finance Department was further perpetuated by his AO Technology Solutions company's receiving of 4.3 billion rands of PIC money for a 29% stake therein, worth only 292 million rand. Here's testimony from the former PIC CEO, Dan Machila, about that particular transaction.
Statement The PIC invested 4.3 billion rand in IO technology in a controversial deal clouded by reports of overvaluation and flouting of PIC procedures. Machila says he saw the IO deal as strategic for the PIC as it gave the asset manager exposure to the growing ICT sector. Machila says the decision to sign IO Technology's irrevocable subscription before the Portfolio Management Committee meeting was made by Lebogang Molebati, who was acting as head of listed investments. He denies putting pressure on subordinates to pass the IO deal.
The decision to sign was that of Mr. Molebati as executive head of the department at that time. He came to me and said, "There's pressure, what do we do about this?" I said to him, "You've done all the work, so what is the problem? We can sign." Because he has signing authorities. Then he signed. I said to him, "I will co-sign with you to demonstrate that I support you. As the head, as the chairperson of PMC, we will ratify this action at the next committee."
It is these very types of unscrupulous deals with parties such as the state, international ally country military affiliate families such as the Guptas, and businessman Iqbal Survey that result in our main retail bank statuses being downgraded, just as on the 1st of April in 2020 by Fitch and Standard & Poor's, with the reason being given being the fact that our state-owned entities like Denel and Eskom are being captured by government cronies. Independent newspapers' parent company's reach extends to the co-ownership relationship of this newspaper company with two Chinese state-owned enterprises, namely the China International Television Corporation and the China Africa Development Fund, who've invested 400 million rands in the acquiring of 20% of the newspaper. Adding yet another case in point to the controversial taxation relationship between the Guptas and the South African Revenue of Services, or SARS, is the Chinese locomotive manufacturer, CSR Corporation Limited, now reformed and renamed CRRC's 2012 51 billion rands tender to supply 600 locomotives to State-Owned Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, or PRASA, which resulted in SARS freezing of these funds after revelations of corruption in the procurement process. South Africa's bilateral treaty agreements with Sweden are also at stake since Sekunjalo Investments Acquisitions private equity firm has strategic investments in Saab, South Africa, the South African subsidiary of Swedish aerospace and defense company Saab Group. As a South African representative in the global business platform, Independent Newspapers has the immense responsibility of supplying government authorities with comprehensive tax compliance status documentation, just as SARS permits, whenever the need arises. Dr. Dion George, DA Shadow Deputy Minister of Finance, is duly appealing for adequate documentation which certifies independent newspapers' proper tax standings prior to their dealings with government. As per the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, Act number 108 of 1996's Chapter 5, Section 83A and C, quote, 83, the President, A, is the head of state and head of the national executive, and C, promotes the unity of the nation and that which will advance the Republic, unquote. In keeping score of State President Cyril Ramaphosa's deeds towards advancing the Republic of South Africa, we noted in his most recent State of the Nation address, or Sona, this past Thursday, that he addressed his plans for the Durban and Ngqura container terminals. The problem with this is that these two ports, which are rated two of the worst ports in the planet by the World Bank and World Economic Forums, or the WEF-affiliated, quote, Container Port Performance Index 2020, unquote, in terms of a statistical and administrative approach respectively, were on the presidency's agenda exactly a year prior to his latest announcement. Additionally, the Durban port was featured in the Sona for the third year in a row.
We will undertake a fundamental overhaul of Durban Port, the third largest container terminal in the Southern Hemisphere, to reduce delays as well as costs. We are repositioning Durban as the hub port for the Southern Hemisphere. and Transnet will soon ask for proposals from private partners for the Durban container terminals within the next few months, which will enable partnerships to be in place by October of 2022.
Even with that being the case, what's most devastating is the fact that the presidency was under the impression that these very ports were overperforming and had planned to decrease their output or productivity by 20%. Had it not been for the Container Port Performance Index 2020, which was released last year, the presidency would have forgotten of the initial 2020 Sona sentiment pertaining to the dysfunctionality at Transnet in that, quote,
"One of the challenges that we've been facing is the congestion and the inefficiency of our ports,"
unquote. The unemployment figures for the country have been on an upward trajectory in the past decade and are currently at the, quote,
highest recorded level,
unquote, of 34.9%, as President Ramaphosa duly acknowledged in his latest Sona. Just as it's often asserted of late, whenever a government department is in an economic bind, these startling numbers in the labor sector have been attributed by the president in last year's Sona to the ensuing results of the onset of the COVID-19 epidemic, when he said, quote,
"There were 1.7 million fewer people employed in the third quarter of 2020 than there were in the first quarter before the pandemic struck,"
unquote. If we, however, refer to the unemployment rates of the 2 years before the arrival of COVID-19 to our shores, we see that the percentage was climbing from 26.7% in 2017 to 27.7% in 2018. We will have to closely observe the president's actions moving forward with regards to his latest promise, which went in the following manner.
"We will, as the Commission's first report recommends, strengthen the system to protect whistleblowers who are a vital safeguard in the fight against corruption."
Whether or not he follows the recommendations of the Sona Commission on State Capture's first report, as he inferred at his Cape Town City Hall Sona, will be determined when he is confronted with a similar circumstance as when he was Deputy State President in 2015, when then Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene was dismissed for allegedly rejecting the nuclear program that benefited the state captured. During President Ramaphosa's first term, we witnessed another sinister removal of a state-owned enterprise or SOE executive in the form of the 2019 interim group CEO of the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, or PRASA, Sibusiso Sithole, for what was reported to being his refusal to accede to appoint certain people into strategic positions within the parastatal. Caleb Kachalia, Member of Parliament and DA Shadow Minister of Public Enterprises, is explaining how the State President's Sona proposal of a, quote, presidential SOE council, unquote, which, quote,
is preparing recommendations on state-owned enterprises to be retained, on which should be retained and which should be consolidated, and which do not serve the purpose of the public should be disposed of,
unquote, is a ploy to further deliberate, delay justice, and waste citizens' monies. Thank you.